Saturday, the 14th of June, was the No Kings protest day across America. This was supposed to be the moment where the United States of America stood up to dictator Trump and stopped him in his tracks. The latest proof of Trump's ambition to be a king were, of course, the ICE raids, federal immigration and customs enforcement officers rounding up known illegal immigrants and deporting them from the United States of America. But even worse was the so-called fact that Donald J. Trump had organized a massive military parade for his 79th birthday. Oh yes, that's right, a birthday military parade in the style of bloody dictators like Chairman Mao or Joseph Stalin. The Guardian said that Trump's military parade taps an ancient tradition of power, from Mesopotamia to MAGA, and asserts that critics see echoes of authoritarianism, a break from the US's usual restraint on military displays. And just in case you missed their meaning, they conveniently provided us with images of marches from totalitarian China and communist Russia, just in case you didn't catch it the first time. The breathless headlines are unrelenting. Trump presides over army parade, celebration or dictator behavior, asks Al Jazeera. A Google search reveals a veritable riot of headlines, from the cynical, like The New Yorker saying that Trump's military birthday parade rolls past sparse crowds in Washington, to the desperate Sydney Morning Herald asserting that Trump's military parade is out of step with reality and a poor imitation of those by dictators Putin, Hitler and Mussolini. Because if there's one thing that the Sydney Morning Herald knows about, it's how to lose your grip on reality. Then there's widely publicised claims that military veterans are horrified by the Trump birthday parade. The New Zealand Herald have saved the world by breathlessly claiming that Donald Trump basks in birthday military parade as protests sweep the US. But every single one of these articles contains a cleverly concealed lie. See, this is indeed a birthday parade, and it happens indeed on Donald Trump's 79th birthday. But that's because President Trump happens to share his birthday with the US Army, 14th of June. And it so happens that the US Army had its 250th birthday on Saturday, the 14th of June 2025, and that is the birthday that this parade was actually commemorating. The fact that it took place on Donald Trump's birthday is just a quirk of history. And yeah, if this was a birthday parade for Trump, then yes, that would be out of step with social norms and US history. And if that were true, then this would be an uncomfortably dictatorial display of power, like these headlines claim, but that is simply not what's happening here. This parade is a 250th birthday parade for the US Army, so yeah, this all makes perfect sense. And here's the dirty little secret that these articles don't want to admit. This parade was being planned long before Trump took office, and this exact parade would have happened on this exact day and probably looked pretty much exactly the same, even if Kamala Harris had been elected as president. But never let the truth get in the way of a good story, right? The Democrats and their enablers used this upcoming parade as a pretext to whip up a frenzy of fear and to mobilize millions of people, or so they claimed, to the No Kings protests held at thousands of locations around America. According to them, this was going to be the day when America rose up and put a stop to Trump's royal ambitions. So how did it go? Not well. In fact, it went so badly for the anti-Trump brigade that I think they've all but ended any serious opposition to Trump for at least the next year or more. We'll dive into the details in a minute. But first, my name is Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to cut through the crap that surrounds us from the mainstream media so that you can make sense of the nonsense. I am 100% viewer supported, so if you appreciate having an Australian voice of reason in a world full of madness, then please help me to keep the Topher Project going by buying me a coffee via the Buy Topher a Coffee button on my homepage at topherfield.net, or by buying yourself or your loved ones copies of my best-selling books about civil disobedience and what good people should do when their government goes bad, or by buying my multi-award-winning DVD, Battleground of Melbourne, or my t-shirts and hoodies, which have a range of different designs, and in the process you'll be helping me to keep doing what I do, and bringing you stories like this one. And side note, this is story number 100 for the Topher Project, and that's not counting the interviews that I also do over and above that number. So in just the last 5 months, I've brought you dozens of stories each and every month, where I've been cutting through the crap and clearing away the nonsense so that you can understand the world as it changes around you, and so that you can make better choices for yourself, and as I say at the end of every story, so that you can stay free. And it's only thanks to you, my viewers, and your wonderful support that I get to do this and that I'm able to pay my bills at the same time. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, back to these No Kings rallies. I said in a recent video that I believe Trump made a mistake by calling out the National Guard in Los Angeles to quell the anti-ICE riots. One of the reasons why I was concerned and why I thought that was a mistake was because by calling out the National Guard for what really were relatively small, relatively minor disturbances, Trump would give the Democrats plausibility when they lied and claimed that Trump was a wannabe king, a wannabe dictator. He's not. But by calling out the National Guard like he did, he was giving the Democrats ammunition, and I was concerned that by giving them that ammunition, Trump was adding fuel to the fire of these protests that just took place on the weekend. Turns out that whilst I do think it was a mistake from Trump, and I think it was wrong as a matter of principle, I shouldn't have worried about what the Democrats and anti-Trumpers might do because it turns out they're absolutely broken, and they can barely even get a crowd right now. I will say that to their credit, these No Kings rallies were rallies, not riots, with the exception of Los Angeles and Portland, because of course lefties are going to riot in LA and Portland. But almost everywhere else, we saw small to medium crowds with a few large crowds gather and peacefully protest against Trump in exactly the way that they should in a healthy democracy. So credit where it's due, fair play to them. But the question that has to be asked is, where is everyone? Like I said, there's a few decent crowds, certainly numbering in the tens of thousands at times and in places. But the breathless headlines claiming millions at some of these rallies are as credible as the headlines claiming that this was a birthday parade for Trump, rather than for the US Army. In other words, it's complete nonsense. Looking at the photos and the videos from right across America, it is clear that the combined total of people is certainly in the hundreds of thousands, which is a great turnout for any protest movement and certainly demonstrates the fact that there are a lot of unhappy Americans. But hundreds of thousands of people in a country with 350 million of them? And let's not forget that these No Kings protests had the backing of Democrats, plus a laundry list of partisan non-government organizations, funding from Soros and support from billionaires including Walmart heiress Christy Walton. They had funding, they had advertising, they had high-profile speakers, and yet the best they could do was what? A combined total of maybe 0.1% of the US population. And if you were to draw a Venn diagram of people who attended these No Kings rallies and people who supported a medical dictatorship during COVID, I bet it would be a perfect circle. And we can be sure that these mostly old, mostly white protesters voted for Joe Biden back in 2020. And they did that because most of them knew him from school. Look at them. They're in the same generation. Some of them look like they could probably personally remember the last time the US actually had a king, that being King George of England back in 1775. But more significant than the people who are at these No Kings rallies are the people who aren't. Apparently, Joe Biden got over 81 million votes in 2020. Kamala Harris apparently got 75 million, which means that even if I be absurdly, ridiculously generous with these crowd estimations and say that, hey, a whole 3.5 million people showed up to these No Kings protests nationwide, which is a ridiculous overestimate, but just run with me here, that would still mean that more than 70 million Americans who apparently voted for Kamala Harris couldn't be bothered showing up to one of these protests. Remember that voting is voluntary in the US, it's not compulsory, so more than 95% of the people who could be bothered heading out and voting against Donald Trump at the last election couldn't be bothered heading out and holding a placard on the weekend. These No Kings rallies were supposed to be proof that Americans overwhelmingly reject Trump and his policies. And the misinformation industrial complex, also known as the mainstream media, would like you to believe that that's exactly what happened on Saturday. But the truth is, these rallies are an epic fail. They prove only that the vast overwhelming majority of Americans, including, by the way, the vast overwhelming majority of Democrat voters, just aren't that upset, and they aren't that worried, and they can see through the scaremongering and the propaganda that is being shoved down their throats. Personally, I still stand by my view that Trump should not have called out the National Guard in LA. He saved Governor Newsom from himself. I think it was a wrong move as a matter of principle. The situation just didn't justify it. And I also think it was a poor move tactically, politically, because it risked making this weekend's protests much bigger than they would otherwise have been. But with those protests now having come and fizzled, I will also concede that Trump knows what he's doing. And what he could see, and what now the world can see thanks to these fizzled No Kings protests, is that Donald Trump has the overwhelming support of the vast majority of Americans. And that in fact, the crowds supporting him and the Army's 250th birthday were far younger, far more diverse than the retirement home residents that showed up for the No Kings rallies. The No Kings rallies have shown that America is, in fact, still a functioning democracy. Non-violent protest is still very much allowed in Trump's America, and his America both needs no king and has no king. My name is Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to make sense of the nonsense that surrounds us in the misinformation industrial complex. This is the 100th episode of the Topher Project, and I am 100% viewer supported, so please help me to continue doing what I do by buying me a coffee via the button on my website, topherfield.net, and by checking out my books, DVDs, and merch from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Thank you so much for your support and for watching to the end. Please like, comment, subscribe, and as always, stay free.